Fred, any insurance for Stetson Bennett, or does he just need legal fees now at this point? I mean, that was
I think he needs some legal fees at the moment. But I will say, I'm glad he wasn't driving a car because that would mean your insurance is getting ready to go through the roof.
it's very true. Uh, well, I mean, being in Atlanta, and being around, I would imagine a lot of Georgia fans, even though Atlanta's so cosmopolitan. I mean, how do you think that's received by Georgia fans? Because I look back at it, and we've all made mistakes, and I get that, but this is the most important 3 months of his professional football, of his football career. You could argue
Hmm.
it's a chance to get ready for the NFL draft, and here he's put himself in this predicament. And he already had size working against him. He had a lot of things I think working against him as far as from a talent scale. But now I see him get arrested, and I'm like, yeesh. If I'm in the fourth round, we used this discussion before you got on. If I'm deciding between Hendon Hooker and Stetson Bennett, it ain't close. I'm taking Hendon.
I'm gonna take Henry regardless of what just happened. I don't look at Stetson Bennett as saying he's a fourth round pick. We had this conversation last night watching the games. Myself and Leonard Little and Al Wilson, Jamal Lewis, we all talked about the draft and where he would be slated. I was the only person that thought he would get drafted.
Wow.
Everyone else in the room thinks he's not going to get drafted because of, for one, his intangibles. He's 5'10", 195, 200 pounds. That's a small quarterback, and this, you don't get too many Drew Breeses. And we talked about how I heard you guys talking about this earlier. How he had a stacked team. You look at a Georgia team that's been ranked in the top 5 recruiting classes for the last I can't remember how long. I mean, even when Mark Rick was there, they were in the top 10 every year. So I'm looking at it from a standpoint of the group of guys he played around. Now, I'm not going to ever take anything away from a guy who won 2 national championships back to back, and you did it in the SEC. And one of those was undefeated season. So I give him credit. I think he'll get drafted. Do I think him getting arrested hurts his draft status? No, because I didn't think he had much of a draft status in the first place. I think he's a second day, third day guy, seventh round. If he got lucky, maybe sixth. But I think he'll be a seventh round draft pick. And I would draft Hendon Hooker higher simply because what he did in the season, in my opinion, was just as impressive. It's always impressive you can win back to back championships. I don't care who you're playing. But individual talents, I'll take what Hendon Hooker did this year over what Stetson Bennett did this year when it comes to just intangibles and stats and those type of things, because he did it with a recruiting class that was no higher than 15. You know, we haven't had a top 10 recruiting class in a long time at UT. For him to do what he did, no one actually expected it. None of us expected 10 wins this year. If you did, and I'm a UT homer. You know that. I love UT. I pick us to win every game because I feel like there's a chance to win every game. However, I didn't see us at 10-2, so
No,
I'm
I
happy with what we did.
agree. Caleb.
Yeah, Fred, I want to stay on this for a minute because it's funny because during the season last year, I made a habit of comparing Stetson Bennett to your old teammate T. Martin as a quarterback in the sense of they had a bit of a chip on their shoulder. A lot of people didn't believe in them. Then they took over and they had a lot of great talent around them, but they had to get them over the hump. But then I think you compare their draft stock. One, T. Martin had way better measurables than Stetson Bennett, but at the same time, you could never see T. Martin getting into a situation like this. I feel like what happened over the
No,
weekend.
no,
And he seemed like the most mature person ready to get drafted after 99. And doesn't it seem like, given if you're having that chip on your shoulder, isn't it kind of important to maybe steer clear of getting into trouble like that?
Well, I'll say this: he was in the state of Texas. He just whipped up on their on. I mean, he just beat the crap out of those guys. I mean, I look at him getting arrested is probably because if they knew he was Stetson Bennett and he was in the state of Texas, somebody should have arrested him for what he did to TCU. I mean, he made those boys look bad. Now, had that been in Georgia, he would have never gotten arrested ever. And I look at it from a standpoint. I don't look at them and say, I don't look at him and say, okay, you got in trouble. That's it. I think this is going to be blown under the water. I mean, it's just I don't think it's going to make a difference either way. I think his draft status is his draft status, and that's pretty much it. He's shown to be a he's shown to be a kid that you could draft based on how he's acted over the last 2 years, and he got in trouble. Yes, I get it, but I don't see him getting in really. I don't see it making that big of a difference. I mean, in a couple of years, the guy could run for office in the state of Georgia, and they love him that much here. So I don't see it hurting him as bad.
Yeah, that maybe he just needs to avoid Texas for a while.
Yeah, all of Texas, every last inch of it, because
I,
if he stays in Georgia, he's gonna be fine.
I think it would take an extradition to get me back in there if I were him. But let's look back at Tennessee season because that's more important than Stetson Bennett. I'd say they're about probably. I'm going to roughly say there are 50 quarterbacks that could have won a championship with that team. I'm not taking anything away from you either, but I'm maybe 25. Let's say 25. But anyway, so you mentioned you were surprised. I had Tennessee at 9 wins. I certainly didn't see 11. Was there a point? I mean, the easy one's Alabama. You can take that if you want to, but was there a point where you saw that? Whoa, this team has a certain belief, and you've been through this, and it has a certain belief, a certain inner strength that could make them better than what we thought at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, it was. I guess first early part of the season we beat Florida. That was like okay. We kind of felt like we had an opportunity to beat Florida. I think when it came down to that Alabama game and seeing us win that game, when the season started, I thought 8 or 9 wins. You beat someone you're not supposed to beat, but lose to someone you're not supposed to lose to. And it kind of actually happened that way. If you told me you'd be 10-2, you beat Alabama, beat Florida, but you lose to South Carolina, I wouldn't have told you that would have been that would have been the case. I wouldn't have predicted that. But after beating Alabama, we were on a high, knowing that okay, we didn't expect to win this game. No one expected for us to win this game. Now you really have a shot at going to the national championship. However, I will say this, Dave, I keep it 100. I always, that's just who I am. I kept saying as the season was going, man, our defense hasn't played great, and they got some holes in it. I hope it doesn't show up in a big game, you know. And South Carolina happened, and the craziest thing was that I got phone calls from Deion Grant that weekend. That Wednesday was like, for some reason, this game scares me. Or at least 3 of my teammates called me to tell me that.
Really?
Jeff Coleman, Deion Grant, and and Dwayne Goodrich. They all like, man, I just don't know if we're gonna show up. This is a hostile environment. It's a night game. These people are gonna be drunk. They're gonna be excited, and they got one of the best fan bases in college football anyway. South Carolina, even though they don't win a lot, they pack the place out for the first half most of the time. They usually get discouraged in the middle of it somewhere and leave. But you got a rowdy group. No one is expecting for them to beat us. It was a trap game. And I kept saying, nah, we're going to win this one. I didn't go to the game. Like I've gone to almost every game this past year. I went. The 2 games I did not go to were the ones I know we lost. So I feel bad about it now. But I don't know if I could have took being in South Carolina Stadium and watching us get beat. But I kept saying at some point I hope our defense doesn't get exposed. And South Carolina exposed our defense. Now we fixed it. We got in beating Vanderbilt and also beating Clemson. I think our defense did a really good job. But that one game, they had a game plan against our defense, and it showed you every hole that we had on defense. So I'm glad we fixed it for the bowl game. Because going forward, everyone's going to look at that South Carolina game and think that's the way they can beat us.
Fred, I want to stay on that South Carolina game, funny enough, because we talked, Dave and I, right after that game, and we both agreed. One of the things that we feel like kind of led to that loss was leading up to the game, Tennessee was in the college football playoff hunt, the 4-5 spot, and then you saw TCU barely win that afternoon. I think you saw Ohio State barely win, and you're so focused on those other games that maybe it gets into your head a little bit on what you have to do. Does that sometimes have a factor in games? I know the year you guys won the SEC title in 1998, y'all were right there with Kansas State and UCLA that same day. Like, oh, which of us three? One of us is going to get left out. Kansas State and UCLA both lose. Y'all were in a dogfight with Mississippi State until the fourth quarter. Do you think that had an impact on the team against South Carolina? Or just wondering all day what was going to happen with these other teams that were in competition with them for that playoff spot?
If that's the case, you're looking at the wrong thing. You should be focused on your game. Honestly, us playing against, we didn't care who won against Kansas State, and I guess it was at Texas A&M. We didn't care who won against UCLA and Miami. We didn't care about it. We wanted to win our game. In order for us to get to the championship game, we had to win ours. If you don't win it, you're not there. So I didn't care who we were playing next. It was who we were playing right then that mattered more than anything. So it didn't matter if we got to the championship game and it was UCLA or if it was Kansas State. Still wouldn't have mattered. You're the next group. You're the next game.
Fred, in a flip-flop sort of way, this team kind of was like the 98 team in that the 98 team was so defense-oriented, and this past year it was so offense-oriented. And the one game in particular that I thought, well, I mean, I guess we could say Kentucky too, but the one game that I thought that Tennessee's defense really bailed them out was that Pitt game earlier in the season. I was just running through my head. I can't remember the offense ever having to bail you guys out. It's not that they didn't play well at times, don't get me wrong, but I don't remember a situation because your defense was so good in which the offense, it was up to them to make plays or you weren't winning. I don't remember that game happening.
I have a hard time remembering something like that right now myself. Defensively, we did pretty well in our games. I mean, over the years, I felt like they did a few things, but we were really good on defense back then. That was one of the things that they always say defense is better early, than it is late in the season. But I felt like we had some really good teams, a lot of talent on defense, and the game was played at a different pace back then. It's faster and all that type of stuff now, but it was a little bit different for us back then. Defensively, we had a lot of speed on the field.
I guess there were drives, like if we want to say this late Syracuse drive, if we want to say the Arkansas drive, but of course, we know what set that up. There weren't games.